Well, in the last few minutes, the transport unions have just concluded a meeting with the Transport Ministry and other interested parties from the government side on a potential increase in transport fares. There were a lot of conversations about the increase in fuel prices that we've seen at the pumps. But it really gets to crunch time when you start beginning to talk about transport fares. Because it's one thing to increase fuel prices at the pumps. But when that happens, it is transport owners, private car drivers like myself who feel it, right? That's a small minority of Ghanaians. Immediately, you translate those increases that you've seen at the pumps to transport fares, then the vast majority of Ghanaians, the masses, begin to feel the impact. That's when the ripple effect begins. It has implications for everything, goods and services, transport fares, everything then begins to be impacted. And that is why this is absolutely critical in analyzing where we are currently in terms of the economy and yourself. That's why we're having this conversation tonight, because the conversations have already begun about how much should transport fares go up by. So we're going to look at that tonight. We're going to look at justification for the transport operators, the commercial transport operators, and then we're going to look at the impact. My analysis tonight will draw on all that before we get to the very latest on what the meeting has decided or didn't decide and how that may impact you. So this is the place to be. Stay with me. You need this information for your good selves. We know that the Concerned Drivers Association, they are asking for an upward of 20 or 30%, an upward of 30% in transport fares. This is significant. That is what they've gone to the table with. In fact, they've said that this is what we want. We may come down to 25%, but we are not going to take anything less than 25%. So just begin to calculate if you are a commercial transport user commuting to work tomorrow, assuming they get their way. And remember, they are private commercial transport operators. They can do this by themselves, but in good faith, they are consulting the government about it. Because why? Because it's one of those very critical things when it comes to the management of the economy and management of the country. You can talk about all the numbers, Moody's downgrading, etc. Once it comes to transport fares, that's where everybody else begins to feel it. And so that's a big deal. So begin to translate this into how much you use. So if you normally will spend 5 cedis from where you are to your workplace, put on that 30% of that. And then you begin to see how significant the cost will be to your own pocket. This is where it begins to hit you there. And so you begin to spend, 60 cedis more than you would from driving, that's what, 7 cedis, 50 pesos. If you're paying 5 cedis to and fro, you're beginning to see that much on that, spending one way. So two-way, 2 cedi, 50 pesos is going to be added onto that month. That's a lot of money for the ordinary Ghanaian. That's what they're asking for. And the negotiations have begun. We understand that the conclusion have not been reached yet, and they may have been a deadlock. We'll get into that very shortly. But let's track back a bit. Let's track back to historical figures in terms of what the unions have been asking. If you go back to 17 January 2022, they were asking 40%. But since then, they've as of 7 February 2022, they brought it down to 30%. So that is where they started. This is where they are. We're hearing tonight that in negotiations, the transport, private transport commercial users have said, well, they can come down a bit more to 25% for everybody else. And so that's where they are. Whether the government accepts that or not, we understand there has been some haggling over that. Again, if you look at the figures as we have it, right now, if you go to the pumps, for those of you who drive your own vehicles, you've been buying this already. For the commercial vehicle owners, they've also been paying for this already. So they've been bearing the brunt of this themselves. But they are tired. They say they want to pass it on to you. The majority of us Ghanaians will have to begin to pay part of this. This is how much those who drive our own vehicles and the commercial transport owners have been paying for the last few days now, especially since the price stabilization levy that was suspended was reinstated. It shot the prices up at the pumps for the very first time in a long time over 7 cedis. That is, in Ghana currently, a liter of petrol is selling for more than $1. That is absolutely jaw-dropping. And of course, we begin to see its impact on you very, very soon when transport fares go up. If you go to Total, you're paying 7 cedis, 45 pesos for super. Talking about diesel, the 7 cedis, 50. That's a lot of cash to dispense with just to drive your car. And remember, the commercial driver is not only paying this, but he's also having to buy spare parts. Now, if you consider that the exchange rate is also misbehaving currently, and the cedi is really weak against the dollar, we have a challenge with depreciation itself, then you begin to see how the importation of spare parts, the cost of that has also gone up. Remember that government had also reversed this benchmark value policy. So that for the transport commercial driver, he's bearing a significant brunt on your behalf, indeed. If you go to Abosokan currently, the spare parts costs have all gone up because of that, because of the exchange rate issues, because of the import duties. And then, in addition to that, he's having to pay this at the pump. That is, if he decides to buy it at Total. If he goes to Shell, 7 cedis, 48 pesos. Now, GOIL, remember the last time we broke it on PM Express after the meeting with the commercial transport operators at the Jubilee House with the president? They told them that GOIL was going to do something about their prices and come down a bit for them. And we're going to use GOIL as a vehicle to cushion the drivers. Well, so GOIL reduced it. Right the morning after PM Express, they announced it and it went down further. But as you see, GOIL itself is having to play ball now with the rest of the lot. And so they are 7 cedis, 30 pesos. If you come to Allied, 7 cedis, 40. If you come to Zen, 7 cedis, 18 pesos. And so, yes, GOIL is comparatively lower than the rest, but it's still very significantly high nonetheless. And so where you choose to buy is important. And they've explained why they choose what they choose. So that's the picture here. But again, this graph tells you a very important story. So let's go back to 2015. 2015, if you look at petrol, we're buying petrol for 2 cedi, 64 pesos. Just 2015, 2 cedi, 64 pesos. In 2022, we are buying it for 7 cedis, 26 pesos. That tells you how much of your disposable income has been eroded just simply by buying fuel, right? And let's just look at 2019 before COVID to currently. Before COVID, we were talking about 5 cedis, 35 pesos. Now you come to 2020, that's when COVID began. COVID set in quite strongly, and the international price of crude crashed. So that reflected in what we saw. So the prices went down, and so that's the best we've had in recent years. And so we're buying it for 4 cedi, 74 pesos. And then right after that in 2021, when prices began to go up, and everybody predicted that would happen, we are at 6 cedis, 8 pesos. And now we're talking about 6 cedis, we're talking about 7 cedis, 4 pesos, 47 pesos, 50, etc. So that's the trend for you. And so it's not getting better. Until some miracle happens like it happened in 2020, this trend is going to continue. And as many people have said, we are at 7 cedis, 50 already for diesel. It is very likely that this year we might actually hit, and there's justification for this, we might actually hit 8 cedis per liter. That is how bad it is, because we don't really control a lot of this. Everything is dictated by the international market and a lot of the taxes that the government already have on this. And that is the story for you. So whilst I'm talking about what the international market is dictating, there's a huge part of this that government has its finger on the pulse that is leading to the increases that we are seeing also. Just an overbearing number of taxes on the petroleum products. And there are so many of them I don't even want to go through for you. But in all of it, they're talking about 2 cedis, 65 pesos, just taxes alone. Currently, we are 7 cedis. So if you take the 2 cedis away from that, we're talking about 5 cedis thereabout. We'll be paying for the diesel, right? But government says, currently where the economy is, we definitely need this amount. We definitely need it. And so there's nothing we can do about it than fundamentally let you pay those taxes. But there is an irony there. We'll come and explain that very shortly. Can the Ghanaian bear all this at this time? Is this the right time for all this to be happening within the circumstance of the Ghanaians' own living condition and standard? We'll tell you what the evidence is telling us tonight as we go through these analysis for you, just to appreciate where we are going now that we're having a real conversation about increasing fares. Now, the transport operators, to be fair to them, in the last year, they went to government and said, scrap 5 of these levies, scrap them. They asked for energy sector recovery levy to be scrapped, sanitation and pollution levy, which the government introduced recently, on top of everything else that we have to be scrapped, energy debt recovery levy to be scrapped, road fund levy to be scrapped, a special petroleum levy to be scrapped. They wanted 5 of them scrapped so they can cushion the rest for us. Government obviously met them and said, we can't do anything about it. And so these levies are still on the petrol you buy at the pumps. The demands by the drivers had not been heeded too. And what do we see here as a result of that? What we see is, if you take the 5 that they were asking government to scrap last year, which government obviously hadn't done, look at how much all these 5 taxes add on to what you pay at the pumps. Energy sector recovery levy, 20%, 20 pesos. You talk about sanitation pollution levy, 10 pesos. Energy recovery levy, 49 pesos. And then you have road fund levy, which is supposed to be the fund in which we put a lot of the money so that you can fix your roads and build more, right? And then that's 48 pesos. Special petroleum levy itself is 46 pesos. So combined, this is a significant amount that has led to price increases at the pumps. Now, the thing about this to note is where we are currently at 7 cedis, that's the current pump price of 7 cedis, 26 pesos on the average. The total charge on the 5 levies is 1 cedi 73 pesos. Now, as I said earlier, so if you scrap those 5, you're coming down to some 5 cedis 53 pesos. So this is where we are. If you listen to the drivers, if you listen to the commercial drivers, and government takes it off, this is what it is currently. 7 cedis will be a bit less than what we are currently charging. Okay, so you look at the trend again. If you look at the amount you pay as levies and margins per liter of petrol in Ghana, 2018 to 2022, you begin to see a certain trajectory. 2018, you're paying, on top of everything you pay for, in terms of the levies and taxes, you're paying 1 cedi 9 pesos, right? And 2019, you were paying 2 cedi 30 pesos. So you see the increment is gradually becoming very unbearable for many people, for those who drive and for those who own vehicles. It's not always that the drivers have translated this into fares. And so pay attention to that. 2020, as we saw because of COVID, we have a certain reprieve there. And then we are back up again to historical highs in 2022 of 2 cedis 65 pesos. So that tells a whole story. But the driver's story is one that we haven't told enough. They have cushioned this and taken the hit for so long. The point they're making to government tonight in the meeting is, we can't bear this anymore. It's time for the ordinary person to pay this. Why are the fares such a critical matter and so important to the government? And why government is so interested in this? This is why. This is why. Now, upon all the things government is asking you to pay, taxes, you feel it, directly or indirectly. Sometimes you might not even know you're paying, but you pay, right? So, like the e-levy, if it comes, you will feel it pretty hard because you're doing your momo, but you can dodge it if you want, right? Okay, so that's the first part of this. And then you come to fuel prices. With all the taxes that I've talked about, once fuel prices go up, who are those who feel it? Not the masses yet, but it's the vehicle owners and the drivers. So there's a small group of people who, for the last few months, have been feeling the brunt and bearing the brunt of the fuel prices at the pumps. Myself, those who own vehicles, private commercial drivers and owners, they've been feeling this. They've been paying for the increase. But here is where the big deal is. This is where the game begins to change. That is, when these begin to translate into transport fares, then everybody else, the average Ghanaian walking on the street, begin to feel it. Masses, prices of goods and services, everything across the board begins to be affected. Your kinky will be affected. Why? Because the maize that is used in the kinky is going to be transported from a farm to the marketplace. That transportation, this is going to affect it, the fares. And so the woman who is bringing that to Accra will now price the new fares, the increases into the maize, and then that will lead into the kenke, and then you buy kenke very expensively. Either the balls will shrink, or indeed you will have a situation where you're buying it even more expensive. Fish, which goes with the kenke, and I love that, also will be affected. Why? Because if they finish at the fishermen do their bait, their baits at the sea, it has to be transported. So you begin to see the man who just finished working at the construction site, carrying heavy loads on his head, cement, etc., who goes to the kenke seller in the morning to pack a lot of this into his belly, the gobe seller, will begin to feel it, because when it goes to buy, he's paying far more for the kenke, for the beans. This is the game changer. And that is why government tonight is saying, we know you are private operators, but we want to have an input in how much you're charging everybody else. But that is a dilemma, right? Because you have a private person who is operating in buying fuel, which is a deregulated sector, and yet when it comes to paying and charging what he believes is fair, government says, let's talk here. This is why, because of the impact that this has. Arguably, nothing has more impact on the majority of Ghanaians than transport fares, arguably. And this is why this conversation is absolutely critical to look at. Now, let's look at the reason why I believe this conversation is critical. Everything you've heard is fine, but there's a context within which all that is playing out right now with the economy, with e-levy, now with fares also about to go up, which is also very critical. So you have a situation with the Ghana Living Standard Survey that is telling us a very interesting story, because you have the average household expenditure in Ghana is now 12,857 cedis per year. Do you know what that translates into? That is 35 cedis a day. So what it means is that the average Ghanaian income, 35 cedis per day, is what people are spending a day on everything else. Transportation, food, etc. How do people survive on it? This is according to the Ghana Statistical Service. So the increase in fares that you're going to see, the transport fares that are going to go up, and the fuel prices, the ability of the masses to pay, they're going to be drawing from 35 cedis on the average, for the average person on this matter. Begin to appreciate why this is so critical for the Ghanaians as far as this is concerned. Now, again, if you look at what the Living Standard Survey is telling us, and this is before COVID and after COVID, this is a very interesting story. Pay attention to this here, because this is income decreased, right? This is household income compared to the period before COVID. The income decreased. 68% told the Ghana Statistical Service that after COVID, before and after COVID, they've had 68% of them say their incomes have decreased, which means that they don't have the means anymore to pay. What they had before COVID is gone down, incomes. But where fares go up, they'll have to pay. If e-levy comes on board, there's 68% who say they simply do not have the means anymore, and their income has been eroded post-COVID. We'll have to bear this. Begin to appreciate the challenge that the Ghanaian is beginning to bear, right? And again, this is another one that is also very interesting. Savings. So how are people been coping, right? This is the story here. Relying on savings. 43% of Ghanaians say they rely on their savings. Reducing food consumption. Food consumption, reducing. 48% say to cope with the challenges that they are in currently, 48% are reducing food consumption. That food, the price is going to go up if fares go up. Can you imagine what will happen to this 42% of Ghanaians who are reducing food consumption? You can imagine they will have to even do more of food consumption reduction just to survive. And then you have those who have been borrowing. That's a huge number of people on debt. Ordinary Ghanaians, poor people, who 14% of them are borrowing. That is the context within which we are having this conversation tonight. And that is why this is important for the government, for the transport operators, and some middle ground will have to be struck here. My guests are beginning to sit down. We're going to get into what happened today at a meeting with the government. So you begin to have the first-hand information. You begin to prepare your life. If you fall in this category, if you get to know where the transport fares are going to land, maybe you begin to adopt some of these things. You're going to rely on your savings, but for how long? You're going to reduce your food consumption. Again, is that sustainable? Can you also borrow? Is that sustainable? Something has to give. We'll talk about that after the break. Stay with me on PM Express.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe and click the bell icon and get notified every time we share something interesting. We would love to have you on there.
99.7.